My name is Noah Stepanek, and I started Dyslexia on the Job with the mission to close the gap in unemployment and underemployment for dyslexic professionals and job seekers compared to their mainstream counterparts. And with the added focus to raise the voice of the dyslexic community and even the larger disabled community. I think now, especially more than ever, we are in a transformative time when it comes to our workforce and it comes to the way we work. We're looking at, and there's talks that are going on now. They certainly had started prior to the pandemic, but certainly with the pandemic, the focus is picking up and really critical in terms of how employers are going to create a new remote workforce, more flexible workforce. And I think that the disabled community at large really needs to have a greater voice in that discussion. So with that, last week you might have saw that I put out a presentation. It was entitled Disability is the #1 emerging market globally. And I want to continue with that theme. In fact, going forward into the next few presentations, we're going to be kind of incrementally adding on to that. But why don't we just jump into it? And again, if you saw the presentation last week, you know that I was talking a lot about this year's World Economic Forum Annual Summit, at which the topic of disability inclusion was a big one and was mentioned by many. There were some statistics, and I'm going to mention a couple of them that were pulled from an organization called Return on Disability, and it was from a report back in 2016. $8 trillion. This was a number that the organization, the report had pulled together at the time and said the amount of money, essentially annual gross income or disposable income that the disabled community at large had control of. And another statistic was based around a survey looking at companies and what their priorities were going into the next year. And at the time, this was, would have been going into 2017, they found that 90% of these companies were really prioritizing initiatives around diversity and inclusion. But of those 90% of the companies surveyed that mentioned that, only 4% included disability as part of those initiatives. And I also had mentioned that, there are a number of these organizations and companies coming out and really alerting, making the alarm that disability inclusion has to be something that's front and center, and certainly it is. And I'm glad to see the focus now, on this issue. But to be honest, it's I wish it happened a long time ago. And then I left the last slide on last week was why now. And so that's what I want to get into. Why now? What's going on? What is the kind of the impetus around this push for companies to really be involved in disability inclusion efforts? So before we start to get into it this week, I just wanted to put this slide in, and this is something that's not necessarily, I wanted to add it to this presentation, but it's something just to keep in back of mind going forward into the next few presentations. It's a term that if you live in the US, you might have seen it in the news over the last year, OCCAM'S razors principle. And essentially, as you see, it's when there are two competing theories that use the same set of facts to describe a thing, the simplest explanation is normally the one that is true. And again, I just want to keep that in mind as we go forward, as we go through this presentation and into the next, because that's kind of how I look at, at how things are shaping, the messaging that's coming out, the messaging that I'm seeing, and what's going on. Everything that I look at, I kind of weigh it, through this prism. And this is just a simple tool to use. So this is Paul Poleman. He is the CEO of Unilever. He is also sits on the board as chair for an organization called the Valuable 500. And I do believe that the Valuable 500 was itself introduced at this year's World Economic Forum. And essentially, their mission is to, it's a community of CEOs of companies that have agreed to make disability part of their diversity and inclusion initiatives going forward. And I love it. I love, he's certainly getting, I think his message landed, and there are major companies that are signing up for this and agreeing to it. And I'm all for it. I think it's great. One of the, and he got up and spoke at this year's World Economic Forum, and he had also, I believe, was the one who brought up and referenced those figures that I mentioned at the beginning, and cited and drew from the Return on Disability's 2016 report. And he pulled those up. He'd also made a comment, and I wanted to mention that, and that was, he said that employees are walking out on employers over issues regarding climate change, disagreements they have with the employer over climate change, over issues that they have maybe with the employer regarding the Me Too movement. And he said the next big issue in which employees are going to be walking away from employers on is going to be around discriminatory practices that employers have towards the disabled community. And I think it's right. I think that's, again, a great message and something to identify. And that's kind of goes back to the $8 trillion figure that he had pulled up, and really great to see that he's messaging that. I also wanted to really quickly mention that that figure of $8 trillion has recently been updated. There was a report put out, the 2020 report for Return on Disability was brought out. It was after the World Economic Forum. The number, unfortunately, I don't have it right in front of me, but I did see, I think it's somewhere up around 13,000 or 13 trillion. The number's just gone, much higher. I think it's much more fulsome view of, again, the amount of money that the disabled community globally controls on an annual basis. So, but what I wanted to kind of draw your attention to was this. Is he trying to say, sound the alarm now around the disability community and how important this segment of the population is as a customer base, as again, around the figures that they control as clients to some of these companies? And is he drawing from a 2016 report and looking back and saying, this is something that's coming, this is some information that's coming, and I'm pulling from going back as far as 2016, and we have to wake up to the fact that this is growing to be an issue, and we're finding out this is really becoming an issue. Well, again, keep that in mind as we go through this. So I think I have a different slant on it, and we can go through it. So this is Rich Donovan, and he comes from the financial world. I think he's one of the most impactful people to me as a dyslexic for his work and what he's done. He's he's an award-winning author. He also the founder, CEO of an organization called Lyme Connect, which is essentially they've created a pipeline from recent grads and those in the workforce that are trying to get into companies such as Google, Microsoft, who are also partners with Lyme Connect. And so what they do is you apply if you get in part of this, if you become part of the program, they can groom you and essentially get you prepared to interview and to to work with, getting you into some of these amazing companies. And so it's become a real synergistic approach and real interesting, novel way of going about it. Really liked it. And as you can see, it's also, he is the founder of Return on Disability, the group that I had mentioned, and the figures, and was the group that put out the figures that I had mentioned at the beginning. And you can see it was, I don't think it was the name, I don't think the name was still Return on Disability, but as we know that group to be what it is now, it was actually founded in 2008. So going back much further than in 2016. And again, I think he's so clever in the way he understands where to pull these these numbers from, and putting hard dollars behind the importance of the disabled community globally. And again, going back to 2008, so well before 2016. This is Kate Griggs. She's from the UK, and I think she is one, again, just like Rich Donovan, she is so impactful. To be honest, I didn't know much about her. In the US, I had known about the organization she also founded, which was Made by Dyslexia. I've seen some videos, but I kind of, until this year, really wasn't familiar with her background. But I found out that she is really the impetus behind some of the just groundbreaking research, and it was her drive that essentially started some of the research and around this, including this report, KPMG's report in 2006, where it was found that essentially the cost to the UK for essentially ignoring dyslexia or not preparing teachers to train them correctly on how to teach students that had dyslexia and get them properly prepared for the workforce going forward, cost the UK as much as £2.5 billion annually. And they took into all sorts, they kind of followed these cohorts and these groups that identified themselves as having dyslexia, and followed them through their life, and looked at everything from teenage pregnancy to alcoholism and a whole bunch of things, and societal cost that was calculated was, again, £2.5 billion annually. And so, and now you can just see the ripple effects, and the focus has really turned, and she's just, again, her incredible work she's done, and very impactful to my community, again, just others that, those of us who have dyslexia, we have to give a big thanks to her and her work as well. And again, going back, it's not as though companies and organizations that are centered and focused on inclusion and disability, I mean, they were looking back at numbers and figures going back to 2016 when these reports were coming out much earlier. And it's and to be honest, you have big companies, the big Fortune 50 companies, a lot of them are doing their own research, and we'll get into that actually in another presentation. But it's not as though they weren't aware of this, and this wasn't something on their radar for some time. It's just, I think what we're starting to see is this information, some of the other, Rich Donovan's groups, and some other reports that are, you just can't avoid. They're just putting hard numbers, and it's not just coming out. It's not just available to employers. It's available to, to the rest of us, and easily accessible. And I think what happens is you're starting to see this stuff bubbling out, and it's just there. You can't hide behind it if you're an employer. You can't kind of message it away or reshape the messaging. It's just too much. And I think that's what I'm looking at when you're seeing this, and you're seeing kind of they were putting emphasis around disability inclusion. Well, I think it's because they just realized that they can't message it away, and it's coming out to the public, and so they're going to have access to this information that really sheds a light on how systemic, how just obvious and glaring these issues are. So then the final report I wanted to get to, this one's National Trends on Disability, or National Trends in Disability Employment, the Untitled report. It's actually a collaborative work that's put together on a monthly as well as an annual basis. It's put together by University of New Hampshire, who has a branch they have a branch within their university. It's the Institute on Disability, and they work with a group called the Kessler Foundation, which is actually the largest foundation in the country, in the U.S., grant funding foundation that focuses specifically on disability employment concerns and issues, and works to help other groups and that are doing research in this area. So they, some amazing work they do, and this isn't specific necessarily to the dyslexic community. I mean, they have a much broader scope, but it's specific to disability employment issues. And so I'm going to take a look here. I'm going to move my screen out so you can see, get a little bit better look. So right off the bat, I mean, you can see that this is the blue line up top. This is what essentially is the mainstream population, those who don't have or don't identify themselves as having disability. This is, and the green is the disabled community. And let's see, the numbers, as you can see, goes back to just the end of, I don't know, third, fourth quarter of 2008. And I believe the last data point, this was from September's report. So it's just this past September. And right off the bat, I mean, for the best, these are the best employment numbers. Oh, and I should mention too, the way they put together and calculate the numbers, it's based off of those who are in the workforce and those who have just recently left or are looking to get back in. So those who are unemployed for no longer than a month, I believe, is the cutoff. So it kind of takes out the long-term unemployed, and it's just looking at this population that is, again, in the workforce or has just recently left but is still actively looking for a job. And what you can see is at the peak, at the high point for the disabled community, the best numbers they had were only 32.7% of those individuals who are in the workforce who are of working age between the ages of 18 to 64. Only 32% of the population is actually, 32.7% of the population is actually working. And that's compared to the mainstream population, 73.8%. And that's not even the high point. I'm not sure what this number is up here, but it looks like it's higher. So it is glaring. You can't get away from that. There are gaps, there are discrepancies that have to be alleviated, and they just can't be hidden or messaged away from by employers. And we need to fix the system, because there is a major issue in this that's drawn out from these graphs. And again, the numbers go back to 2008. It's not as though employers didn't have this information and they weren't seeing this. I mean, there are groups within companies that are looking into this and that see this and that see what's going on and that just are not effective. They're not effective at what they're doing, because something needs to be changed and we need to do something now. So what you can see though, 2008, and that for us in the US, that was, we hit the recession, and we all remember, those of us who, again, were in the workforce or looking for a job at that time, remember how tight it was and how really a race to the bottom we had for some time. This looks like, you can see the numbers for the mainstream. It really was at its worst in the beginning of 2010, and then getting, again, 2011 was still pretty bad. These blips here, I believe, are just the seasonal employment cycles that follow, but You weren't really seeing a recovery in 2011. It wasn't until getting into 2012, and then at that point, everything is just moving straight up. Now look here at the bottom, what we can see is this is the disabled community. You know, they hit the same initial blip where jobs were lost, and then it just kept falling, and the bottom just fell out all the way until the beginning of 2014. And it just tells you, again, that and I think in the disabled community, we understand, you know, that we're kind of the canaries in the coal mine, that we are kind of the first to feel things, and we are probably the last to have, you know, the recovery really take hold. Now you can see here, this is from the pandemic, and you can see the huge dip in to the mainstream population as companies dropped and or jobs were lost, and you can see at the same time jobs were lost in the disabled community. But what's interesting, and you do see a proportional rise as well, but what's still to come, or you know, what we still want to see is, when does it get back just to when does it get back to the glory days, the good days of where we had as a population 32.7% employment. That's not much of a goal, but it's still, we're still waiting to see when we get there, if it drags out or if it's going to be as quick as the mainstream. But to me, I'm going to move the screen back up. Oops. Oh, maybe I won't. There. For me, I really think that the goal shouldn't be to set our sights at 32.7%. I think we really need to do work on raising that number. I think there's plenty of areas, and again, we're talking now in the broader disabled community, but I think there's plenty of space in which, as we're talking about the future of the workforce, as we're talking about what it's going to look like, as we're talking about all these things, really having a greater voice as the disabled community at large, you know, to have input on this, but also specifically looking at the hidden disabled community and those of us in, you know, what we, I guess, refer to as the neurodiverse community, which encompasses a lot. But I know for me, and I know talking with others in the dyslexic community, which we're going to talk about going forward, there are a number of areas where we really need to, you know, have our voices heard. And also, I think what this shows is, you know, going back to POLEMAN's, and I don't want to, I think what he's doing, I think what a lot of these companies are doing is great, but what I think his message to his peers and to the participants at the World Economic Forum, which was sounding the alert that employees are going to be walking away from employers over disability discrimination practices. Yeah, that's certainly an alert, and it's something to make note of. But I think for us in the disabled community, I think you know, the alert is that I don't want to stay with the status quo. I don't think it's enough just to have a mea culpa moment for corporations and employers to come away and say, oh, you know, sorry, we made a mistake, or we, you know, overlooked this. I think it's time that at least you know, to create a platform where really the voices of the disabled are heard, and the community is you know, has a seat in terms of these discussions and what the workforce is going to look like going forward, because these numbers are abysmal, and you know, really just getting back to where we were isn't enough. I mean, especially at this point, things have to change, and we have to figure it out. But that's the goal, and that's what we're going to be talking about going forward. So till next week, as always, if you are a dyslexic professional or job seeker, please take a look at www.dyslexiaonthejob and sign up and become a member. If you are a corporation or organization or an individual who might not be dyslexic but are agree with our mission, again, please take a look, www.dyslexiaonthejob.com, and sign up to be a supporter. Until next week,